electoral college votes. So I think all the
This
craziness.
is big.
It is, yeah.
Good morning. Excuse me. Good morning and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Spokane, where our mission is to join together to create a nourishing, liberal religious home and to champion justice, diversity, and environmental stewardship in our wider world. Or as we say in short, to create community, find meaning, and work for justice. Welcome to one and all. It's great to have you back today. So sorry about the audio difficulties we ran into last week, but I know audio is working today because I listened to it on my device before we formally started. So thanks for being back today, and we'll move forward with where we left off last Sunday, so nobody misses anything. But I do want to begin by welcoming everyone who is in the room with us. Karen Dorn-Steele, of course, is back as our lay leader. Thank you so much. Great to have you. This will now be your second time, even though last week didn't go so well. And Mick-Alina Tyree is on our piano. Thank you so much for being here. Look forward to hearing you play always. And our friend Todd Milne is actually quarantining this morning just to be on the safe side. He's doing well, but was exposed, so he's staying home to keep everybody safe. And we didn't actually have an audio-visual backup person. So Peggy Eckloff is actually back in the booth, and Todd was kind enough to walk us through setup this morning over the telephone, and Peggy's going to be running audio and visual. So if you notice some anomalies or different kinds of creativity, you will know that that's because Peggy is doing this for the first time today, but I know she's going to do great. So Peggy, thank you so much. Yes, and welcome to all of you. It's great to have you. I want to, as always, embrace all that you bring with you this morning. So thanks again for sticking with us and being here under these unusual circumstances. So great to have all of you. And just a reminder, there will be social hour online following the service as well, if you want to link into that from the church email that was sent to you earlier this week. Other than that, I'm going to ask you to go ahead and take a couple of minutes, as usual, at the start of our service to greet one another, however you've come accustomed to doing that under the COVID quarantine, by texting, emailing, phone calling, whatever it might be. Thank you, and as always, I do hope you'll continue to stay in touch throughout the week, but we are going to move forward now by lighting our chalice, the symbol of our faith, the symbol of our unity and our solidarity, of our openness and our inclusion, of our community and our individual uniqueness. May this small flame be our offering of warmth to those who are cold and alone, and a light to those in darkness. May it be a flame that ignites justice in our world and a beacon of hope to those in need, and may it reflect at least a spark of truth wherever truth has been lost, and cast a healthy shadow of doubt wherever it's been found.
George Orwell's famous novel, 1984, was published in 1949. It begins with these words: "It was a bright, cold day in April, and the clocks were striking 13. Winston Smith, a young employee of the Ministry of Truth in a dystopian England, is about to commit a crime. He's very nervous, his ulcer inflamed, but he's ready to embrace humanism by rejecting the three omnipresent slogans of the ruling party for which he has worked. War is peace. Freedom is slavery. Ignorance is strength. He surreptitiously pulls out an antique notebook he's found in a junk shop in a London slum. He starts a diary, an act that risks his arrest by the thought police. Winston has a moment of panic, but then realizes it wouldn't matter if he wrote down with Big Brother or not. Quote, the thought police would get him just the same, Orwell wrote. He had committed the essential crime that contained all others in itself. Thought crime, they called it. Thought crime was not a thing that could be concealed forever. You might dodge successfully for a while, even for years, but sooner or later, they were bound to get you.
Thank you so much, Karen. That's a wonderful reading to get us started off today. I know I got to hear it last week when a few others did, but it's great to hear it again. And 1984 is certainly, unfortunately, a timelessly appropriate horror story. So a constant reminder that we need to remain faithful to the values of freedom and liberty for everyone. I did not receive any particular request for candles of care this week, but we will go ahead and kindle our candles here in our sanctuary for those who are most on our minds and hearts this morning. If you have a virtual candle at home you've been lighting as well at this time, that would be just wonderful. But let's take a moment of silence now to reflect upon those that we're most thinking of this morning. Those named aloud and those embraced in our silence and all those who are suffering in our world at this hour, we hold in our community with compassion. We do have a special collection going on this month. It is for my minister's discretionary fund, also called the Sharing Fund, because it is my opportunity to extend your generosity to others in need, particularly to members of our own congregation who may find themselves in some sort of financial need or financial crisis, as well as to others in the community from time to time also. So it's a fund that seldom has enough in it to meet all of the requests, but we do our best, and I so appreciate the fact that you have kept it sustained all of these years, and know that I do my best to extend that same spirit of generosity on your behalf the best that I can. So December is a wonderful time to request and ask for contributions to it. COVID-19 is hopefully coming to an end within the next several months or so, but that does not mean that the need that particularly the economic crisis has caused are going to be over with any time soon. So this is an important part of our ministry here, an important part of showing our friends and neighbors that we care. So thank you again in advance for your generosity. As always, you can send a check, put the discretionary fund or today's date on that and mail it in, or you can go online to our donations tab and hit the special collection, and again, put today's date, and we'll know what it's for. So thank you so much. I really appreciate you giving me this opportunity, again, to be compassionate towards those in need. And now we are going to have our story for all ages, or time for all ages, perhaps is a better way to put it. Since I don't really tell stories, I just have conversations with some good friends of mine, including there we go. Hello, Purple. Thank you so much for coming back. You're welcome. It's really good to see you. Well, it's good to see you too. Otherwise, I couldn't believe in you. You couldn't believe in me? Why not? Well, I can believe in you because I can see you. Because you can see me. Okay, Purple, how about telling me what this is all about, will you? Well, I read a sign the other day that said, "Seeing is believing." So now I don't believe anything I can't see. Where'd you go? Oh, I'm right here. Well, I think you might be taking that sign just a little bit too seriously or too literally. So how's it been working for you? Not so good. Not so good. Why not? Because the world has gotten very small. Well, I would imagine the world has gotten very small if you think the whole world is only what you can see. That seems like it's a pretty limited view. Yeah, I even had to cancel my trip to China. Your trip to China? Because of the coronavirus, I hope. No, because I've never seen China before. How do I know it's there? Well, of course China exists, Purple. You can take it from me that it does. Have you actually been there and seen it for yourself? Well, no, I've never been to China before, but I'm sure that it exists. But if you can't see it, how can you be so sure? Well, I've seen maps of it and pictures and studied geography, and I've met lots of people from China. Well, I'm still not going. I don't even like going out my front door. Why don't you like going out your front door? Because I can't see through it. How do I know there's anything out there? Well, Purple, you've gone outside your door many times. Hasn't outside always been there? Yes, but I had no way of being certain it's still there. Well, I'll tell you what, let's try a little experiment. I'm going to put a blindfold on you and ask you a few questions. Is that okay? Okay. All right, hang on. Let's try this. All right. Okay, now, you still know we're here, right, Purple? Purple? Purple. All right, hang on. Purple, I only covered your eyes, not your ears. Why didn't you answer me? I couldn't see you. I didn't believe you were really there. Okay. Well, you know, Purple, seeing is one way of believing, and it's a pretty good way of believing, but it's not the only way of knowing things. There are many other ways, too. There are? Like what? Well, lots of experience is another good way. Like when I go outside lots of times? Yes, that's exactly right. You can trust that there's an outside because you've been outside lots of times and it's never not been there. What else? Well, you can know some things by studying and asking the experts, like reading in a dictionary to know the meaning of a word, or asking a doctor what's wrong when you're not feeling so well. Or asking my teacher if I'm stuck on math? Exactly. And you can also use reason to know some things. How do I do that? Well, looking at world maps and photographs, studying geography, and talking to people who've actually been there are all good reasons for believing in China. And even if you've never seen it for yourself, you can trust that it's there. Does that make sense? It sure does. You know what? What? I think I'm going to China after all. Well, that's great, but I do hope that you'll wait till after the coronavirus is under better control. You do believe in the coronavirus, don't you? I do now. Well, and why is that? Because there's more to life than meets the eye. Very good, Purple. Thanks so much for being here with us today. See you later. Thank you.
For our meditation, I've chosen a portion of a poem by W.H. Auden, honoring Irish poet William Butler Yeats, who died in 1939 as Europe descended into fascism and war. In the nightmare of the dark, all the dogs of Europe bark, and the living nations wait, each sequestered in its hate. Intellectual disgrace stares from every human face, and the seas of pity lie, locked and frozen in each eye. Follow, poet, follow right to the bottom of the night. With your unconstraining voice, still persuade us to rejoice. In the deserts of the heart, let the healing fountains start. In the prison of his days, teach the free man how to praise.
For my reading today, I'm going to read from Erich Fromm's little pamphlet on disobedience. In most social systems, obedience is the supreme virtue. Disobedience is supreme sin. In fact, in our culture, when most people feel guilty, they are actually feeling afraid because they have been disobedient. They are not really troubled by a moral issue as they think they are, but by the fact of having disobeyed a command. This is not surprising. After all, Christian teaching has interpreted Adam's disobedience as a deed which corrupted him and his seed, so fundamentally that only the special act of God's grace could save man from this corruption. This idea was, of course, in accord with the social function of the church, which supported the power of the rulers by teaching the sinfulness of disobedience. Only those men who took seriously the biblical teachings of humility, brotherliness, and justice rebelled against such secular authority, with the result that the church, more often than not, branded them as rebels and sinners against God. Mainstream Protestantism did not alter this. On the contrary, while the Catholic Church kept alive the awareness of the difference between secular and spiritual authority, Protestantism allied itself with secular power. Luther was only given the first and drastic expression to this trend when he wrote about the revolutionary German peasants of the 16th century. Therefore, let us, everyone who can, smite, slay, and stab, secretly and or openly, remembering that nothing can be more poisonous, hurtful, or devilish than a rebel. Thank you, Michelina. It's beautiful, as always. All right, the title of my message today is Authority and Unitarian Universalism, Thinking for Yourself in a Climate of Groupthink. And this is my third and final message in a series of sermons offering my response to a 2012 essay presented to the Unitarian Universalist Ministers Association by one of its members, Reverend Frederick Muir. Reverend Muir and I have opposing views about our religion. What he calls its errors, I consider its truths. What he's experienced is our inherent inability to work and get along with each other. I've experienced as caring and cooperative friends working together to make our lives, communities, and our world better for everyone. What he calls covenant, I call dogma. What he calls beloved community, I call authoritarian groupthink. What he considers atomism and self-centeredness, I consider a commitment to the freedom and flourishing of every individual. What he considers our closed-minded and off-putting rigidity, I consider an appropriate amount of humility in response to the deeper mysteries of our existence. What he considers our allergy to authority and power, I consider the primary expression of our Enlightenment heritage and its commitment to freedom of thought and ideological tolerance. In my previous two sermons, I spoke at length about why I feel it is crucial for Unitarian Universalists to be aware of Reverend Muir's essay, since it has become the blueprint for the current direction, if not demolition, of our once liberal religion. He says that our way of faith, from its ministry to its members, has been supported and nurtured by a trinity of errors, leading not only to the ineffectiveness, but to an inability to share our liberating message. I've already addressed the first of these two errors, individualism and exceptionalism. and we'll address the third today. His antidote for all these errors is covenant, which I consider a euphemism for church dogma and ecclesiastical authority, at least in this case. Nevertheless, the leadership of the Unitarian Universalist Association has been administering this antidote, including its plans to go from being a member service organization of autonomous congregations to an ecclesiastical body requiring its members to meet its doctrinal requirements by frequently renewing their promise to do so and to offer proof that they are satisfactorily doing so. They justify these illiberal maneuvers in the name of what they call anti-racism and anti-oppression, because every authoritarian takeover arrives upon the coattails of a righteous cause that is conveniently and unquestionably used to silence and condemn dissenters by demonizing them as heretics, apostates, heathens, witches, communists, terrorists, traitors, sympathizers, and under this new ruse, racist, homophobic, transphobic, and ableist. I've experienced this diabolism firsthand in more than one way. Only a couple of years ago, for instance, some in our local Jewish community began calling me anti-Semitic for publicly expressing my concerns about how Israel is mistreating and oppressing the Palestinian people. Not wishing to offend them and more than willing to make concessions so long as my freedom of conscience remains intact, I invited their leaders to take the lead on the matter in our community, or at the very least, to provide us with a framework for discussing this injustice in a way that they would not consider anti-Semitic or otherwise threatening or offensive. I was told that it is not going to happen, and if I kept talking about it, there would be a problem. I did, and there is. Then, after giving away the Gadfly papers last year during the 2019 General Assembly, hundreds of Unitarian Universalist ministers immediately signed one of two letters calling me a racist and white supremacist, although they felt no ethical obligation to cite anything in my book proving such slander. Instead, they made things up that I did not say. They listed their own beliefs to maliciously imply that theirs are values that I disagree with in my book. I don't. The first of the two letters, both of which were written before most could have possibly read my book, faults it for continually asserting that if people of color would only be logical, things would be different. Nowhere in my book do I imply, let alone state, anything about people of color needing to be more logical, though we all need to be more logical. This is a lie that numerous Unitarian Universalist ministers eagerly signed on to, which to me is as tragic as it is alarming. But it does not surprise me that unreasonable people feel threatened by reasonable arguments. Yet merely using logic is not an act of racism. The second letter, signed by hundreds of UU ministers, explicitly states, instead of accepting the frame of Reverend Eckloff's arguments and debunking them, we instead affirm the following. Instead of accepting the frame of Reverend Eckloff's arguments and debunking them, we affirm the following. And I'm not going to take time to discuss their assertions here, since I only mean to point out the little sleight of hand used to distract attention away from the actual contents of my book. That hundreds of Unitarian Universalist ministers would so immediately, ruthlessly, and baselessly condemn a colleague without the courtesy of actually debunking or even mentioning the claims they take issue with is as unethical as it should be unthinkable, coming from the Unitarian Universalists who are now leading hundreds of our congregations. But as much adrenaline as you may sense coming from me. This is not a woe is me sermon. I accepted the potential consequences of my book before writing it and giving it away, even if I could not have possibly foreseen all that was coming. On the contrary, the reaction against my small book of essays has proven its points far better than its contents do. And it is precisely this reaction that also proves what the result of Reverend Muir's vision for our liberal religion really looks like. In order to cover up the fact that they banned a minister from returning to the General Assembly for giving away a book, the Unitarian Universalist Association's leadership issued a false statement, implying it was because I was unwilling to engage in a covenanting conversation. The letter of censure I received from the Unitarian Universalist Ministers Association less than 2 months later states, "We believe you have broken covenant." Then goes on to use the word 4 more times, including the claim that it is our responsibility to uphold covenant and that ours is a covenantal faith. And as part of its justification for excommunicating me last summer, the Ministerial Fellowship Committee went so far as to accuse me of violating my covenant with all of you by fomenting divisiveness within the congregation you have covenanted to serve, they said, based on what they were told from guess who? Their own UUA staff. Of course, none of these communications cited the covenantal language I'm accused of breaking, for it is meant only as a euphemistic cover for the authoritarian intolerance now being demonstrated by those directing our liberal religion. As I've said before, ours is a liberal religion rooted in the Enlightenment principle that every individual should be free to think and speak for themselves and must have the courage to do so. Sad that it still takes courage, particularly within the UUA, but that's part of being an Enlightenment thinker, is having the courage to do so. It is a principle committed to the freedom and flourishing of every individual, to their right to stand out in a crowd, and to do so without fear of being punished or excluded. The same 3 qualities Reverend Muir calls our trinity of errors: individualism, exceptionalism, and our allergy to authority and power. The antidote for which he says is covenant. I've previously spoken at length about how the misleading use of this word covenant is being used as an excuse to end the centuries-old autonomy and independence of our congregations and turn us into a hierarchical religion forced to adhere to its new doctrine of church, which is why I'm compelled to conclude this series by addressing the error Reverend Muir refers to as our allergy to authority and power. I can understand how those wishing to steal an entire religion then turn it into its repulsive opposite, a dogmatic, punitive ecclesiastical church, might frown upon individuals who think for themselves and are not inclined to simply follow orders. Covenant, as it is being used, solves these inconveniences by empowering the Unitarian Universalist Association to justify its repressive behavior by claiming its victims have violated a promise that they were coerced and fooled into making to begin with. Although I may have become the poster child for what this Orwellian doublethink leads to, many other ministers, seminary students, and church members have experienced what can happen if one says the wrong things within Unitarian Universalist circles these days. Although the same phenomenon is now occurring everywhere within liberal organizations, that it is happening in our religion, which was established to be a sanctuary from such authoritarian abuses, is as shocking as it is heartbreaking. In his brief history of Unitarianism, For Faith and Freedom, Reverend Charles Howe reminds us that Unitarians emerged from a corresponding, though separate, Reformation as the Protestant Reformation of the 16th century. Unlike Martin Luther, he says, who retained many of the organizational and liturgical practices of Catholicism, and John Calvin, who attempted to place not only his system of doctrine, but also his system of church organization and worship on firm biblical basis, there were those, and their numbers were large, who were seeking a religious community of free spirits, one with no set of standards or beliefs, little formal organization, and no prescribed forms of worship. Instead, they were seeking first-hand religious experience through direct communion with God. Through direct communion with God. This new and liberal approach to theology, which gave deference to the individual over priest and preachers, and to humanity over dogma and hierarchy, initially resulted in the Anabaptists, a group of believers who so greatly valued individual freedom that they rejected the validity of infant baptism, believing one's religion should be freely chosen by willing and thinking adults. They were the first to begin baptizing adults who had already been baptized as infants, hence their name, Anabaptists, which means rebaptizers. They also wanted a religion, as Howe says, completely free of state control, which wasn't well received by the leaders of the Protestant Reformation. This eventually led to the issuance of a formal death decree in 1529. They did their best to push back, but following a bloody uprising by the Anabaptists in the city of Munster in 1535, thousands throughout the region were put to death, either by drowning, beheading, or burning. The leaders of the uprising were horribly tortured and executed, and their bodies were suspended in cages from a church tower where they remained until 1811. Can you imagine going to a church where the bodies of heretics remained on display for 276 years? Authoritarians intimidate their subjects by making public examples of any who defy them. The Anabaptists may have been persecuted out of existence, but their remnants went on to become those groups we know today as Baptist, Mennonites, and Unitarians, all of whom continue to maintain an independent church structure and congregational polity, and all of whom have had to struggle with internal authoritarian forces working to undermine such independence and freedom. 32 years after the massacre, Unitarianism was formally born in Transylvania when King John Sigismund chose it as his religion during the 1567 Diet of Torda. A year later, he passed the Edict of Torda, a law protecting freedom of conscience and religious tolerance by guaranteeing no one shall be reviled for his religion by anyone, and it is not permitted that anyone should threaten anyone else by imprisonment or by removal from his post for his teaching. It is because of this long history and hard-won victory that to this day our congregations have the sole authority to call, ordain, and install the ministers of their choosing, rather than have them imposed upon us from high to preach only in the interest of the greater church authorities. But this is no longer so today. We may have the illusion we are still free to do so, but the Unitarian Universalist Association and the UU Ministers Association have set up systems virtually guaranteeing no ministerial aspirant can be credentialed who hasn't swallowed the Kool-Aid. Just look at how many signed the white minister's letter in a knee-jerk response to the Gadfly papers. Although American Unitarianism emerged somewhat independently from its older Eastern European cousin, the latter is historically no less committed to the principles of religious freedom. Like the founders and framers of the United States, America's brand of Unitarianism was inspired by the Enlightenment philosophy summarized by Immanuel Kant as the courage to use one's own understanding. The renowned Unitarian minister, Reverend A. Powell Davies, who was minister of All Souls Church in Washington, D.C. from 1933 until his death in 1957, called democracy our nation's true spirituality, even if it is often resisted by other religions that prefer authoritarian governance maintained by dogmatism. When speaking of the origins of American Unitarianism in particular, he reminds us that President John Quincy Adams, Vice President John C. Calhoun, journalist Joseph Gales, who was personally advised by Thomas Paine to start his revolutionary Sheffield Register, and other Enlightenment leaders were among the founding members of his congregation in 1821 and among the earliest of Unitarians. So, by this time, he says, were many, if not most, of the leading figures throughout the country, including Thomas Jefferson. After the American Revolution, Powell says it was only natural that they should want to form a church which was definitely based on freedom. As over against the free thinkers outside the churches, they wished to be free thinkers inside the churches, lest too much that is essential to religion be cast away. If the Renaissance liberated humanity from the authoritarian dark ages, the flourishing of its principles during the Enlightenment, the Age of Reason, was to help deliver America and its churches from the authoritarian colonialism and tyranny it had been founded upon. This is the reason Davies says authoritarian systems, whether of church or state, are not American, and they can never become American. As a liberal religion founded upon this same principle, I would say the same is true for Unitarianism. Unitarian systems are not Unitarian and cannot. Unitarian systems that are authoritarian are not Unitarian and cannot become Unitarian. This is why, as the great 20th century Unitarian theologian James Luther Adams, best friend of Erich Fromm, once said, "Free choice is a principle without which religion or society or politics cannot be liberal." In his book, The Unitarians and the Universalists, historian David Robinson reminds us there were many notable 18th century Unitarians living in Philadelphia where Enlightenment values such as reason, tolerance, and moral service gained a stronghold, including Benjamin Franklin's friend Joseph Priestley, who founded the first Unitarian church in America, erected in Philadelphia in 1796. Jefferson called Priestley's writings the basis of my own faith, and the reason, he said, I trust there is not a young man now living in the United States who will not die a Unitarian. Jefferson got it wrong. And today we have to worry if there is any young person now living in the United States who will die a Unitarian, since it has been taken over by a grotesque impostor. But just because we are devoted to free thinking and ideological tolerance does not mean we are anti-authoritarian, although we are compulsively discerning about the authorities that we do trust and thoughtfully choose to help guide us. We trust the authority of reason. We trust the authority of science. We trust the authority of empirical facts. This is why Reverend Muir is right in saying covenant cannot coexist with individualism, although not as he thinks, because it is the opposite of his trinity of errors, but because the way it is being used is a euphemism for dogma, and control is the opposite of freedom itself. The UUA and UUMA are now using the word covenant as a cure for individual freedom and congregational autonomy. There are authorities that can earn our trust, but should they fail us, we maintain our own individual authority to ignore and dismiss them and to disobey. Yet we trust no authority that claims the right to impose itself upon us by force, threat, or coercion. We do not trust dogma or dogmatist, and we are too smart not to see through these obvious euphemisms. We do not want church authorities or state authorities telling us what we must believe or what words must come from our mouths or what words cannot come from our mouths. We will not make that devil's bargain. We will promise no such thing. We never have and we never will, at least as Unitarians, because, to paraphrase James Luther Adams, free choice is a principle without which religion or society or politics cannot be Unitarian. Thank you.
Let us remember and honor the long history of Unitarianism and humanism and work to sustain our values in a divided and bruised world. Amen. Blessed be. Salam alaikum and shalom.